Okay, so let me take a second to, I have a bio for Teddy. If you can indulge me for a minute. Teddy is the Senior Research Manager for Access and Affordability at the Web Foundation and focuses his time on the Alliance for Affordable Internet Research programs. He coordinates the A4AI research projects, conduct original analysis and research to support the organization's missions, and uses the team's insights as evidence for policy change. He first joined the foundation in early 2016 and has since helped to co-author a number of publications, including the 2018 to 2020 Affordability Report From Luxury to Lifeline, A4AI's first study of device prices in low and middle income countries. Teddy has a MA, honors MA in middle and in international relations from the University of St. Andrews. I assume that's in Scotland. And MSc in global politics, global civil society from the London School of Economics. Welcome, Teddy, and over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Glenn. And thanks, Alfredo, as well, for the invitation to speak with you all today. So as Glenn mentioned, I'm Teddy Woodhouse. I'm the Senior Research Manager at the Alliance for Affordable Internet. So it's great to talk with you all today. And so I know that the kind of one-word prompt for this week is about development, but just to explain a bit about kind of the organization I work for and our approach to these issues is really focused on, I guess you could think development almost in a broader sense of the development of the relationship between technology and society. So technology and its users, and in particular the internet and its users. And so what is the development of that relationship as it is today? What do we think it could be, and what do we think it should be? So there's lots of questions there that get really interesting. And so from that, what I want to do is give a kind of brief plug for some recent research that we've done. Just profiled here, the costs of exclusion, which talks about the economic consequences of the digital gender gap. And so it summarizes, in short, focusing on these questions of, if we're thinking about the development of the relationship of technology and society right now, what we see is this emerging trend over time that is about the exclusion of women and girls from online worlds, and this kind of myth that technology and particularly ICTs are meant for men, and that men are the ones who kind of have the first claim to how it is used, how it's designed, how it works. And so we're challenging that ultimately, and also exploring what is the cost, not just for those people who are kept off online or who are kept offline, but also what is the cost to all of us in terms of what is lost to humanity because of these kind of societal norms and expectations of who should be online, who shouldn't be online, what kind of internet access is good, what kind of internet access is bad. So in short, I'll do a quick summary of this research, explore some of the themes that we talk about, and then hopefully we can have a pretty open conversation about any themes related to this or kind of other subjects as well of interest to anyone. But yeah, Alfredo, if I can invite you to go to the next slide. So yeah, so as I mentioned, the historic trend has unfortunately been that between men and women, if you consider gender as a binary, as many kind of statistical resources do, women have not across the world been less likely to use the internet over time and throughout many parts of the world. And so you'll see here what was the latest estimates from the ITU, which is the UN specialist body for telecommunications and internet policy areas overall as well, focusing on what is the disparity between men and women and their internet use in different parts of the world. And so you'll see that, when this data was collected, less than half of all women in the world had ever used the internet, whereas men had already reached that milestone a couple of years ahead of them. The situation has changed, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're seeing more people coming online, but these inequalities do persist. And so that's why it's a huge cause of concern for us as we're trying to understand these issues. And what needs to change is in part related around the gender norms and expectations with internet use. So next slide. So one of the things that we've did in this report is we looked at 32 low and lower middle income countries around the world, and we focused in this group of countries in particular because one of the trends we saw were, on average, countries that have lower average incomes have larger gender disparities than higher income countries. So we focused on countries where this problem is the most stubborn and most prolific. And we found that, unfortunately, what looks to be the trend over the past kind of decade is that there's only been a 1.6% reduction in the gender gap between men and women over that decade, which is, very underwhelming progress. And so what we see here is this fact that there are now, more people online than ever, and more people come online every year as a general trend across the globe. But men are outpacing women in this trend, and so that disparity between genders persists because women are not coming online as fast as men are. So next slide. And so what we did is we looked at what can we estimate to be the cost of this exclusion, the cost of this fact that women are coming online at a slower pace than men are, that there are these social norms and other barriers that are having a negative impact on bringing people online. And so what we found is that, on average, if you're adding up the cost of those exclusions, of the difference between men and women and the rate that they're coming online in these 32 countries. And if you estimated what would it be if there was, perfect gender equality versus what is the actual trajectory today, there's an estimated difference of around $1 trillion that has accumulated over the past decade in lost economic returns, lost GDP, because of the digital gender gap. And so this is a huge amount of, potential economic impact. And part of the reason why we're coming to this issue from this angle is this idea of, we want to make it clear to the world that this isn't just, a problem for those who are left offline, and it's not just necessarily a moral issue, moral imperative that we address this issue, but actually we are all losing out by the fact that women and girls are kept offline because of social norms that say they shouldn't be online. And in return, that every one of us has a vested interest, even from a selfish perspective, to be involved in this issue and to want to close the digital gender gap because of the lost economic returns that come out of it. So next slide. This summarizes a bit further research that we did, is that there's, roughly in the next 5 years, we project that if the trend continues, we'll lose another 500 billion across these 32 countries if we don't take action. If the problems persist, if the development of the relationship of technology and society as it has been so far continues, this is roughly the trajectory that we anticipate and roughly the losses we anticipate to humanity overall. And these are just purely the economic consequences. This is not to say anything about the human sacrifices that are made as well, in terms of lost educational opportunities, lost knowledge, in terms of people being excluded from the online world as well. There are kind of so many ways that this issue could be analyzed, but we're focusing on just one quite precise aspect here with this research. So next slide. And so this summarizes a bit from the research, and you can look more into the report to get a deeper understanding of all these aspects as they play out together. But this summarizes in short kind of why do we have this problem? Why is it the case that in many parts of the world, women are online at a lower rate than men are on average? And part of that is affordability. So in a world where the gender gap says that the gender pay gap says in many parts of the world, women are paid less on average than men are. It is more expensive for women in turn, as a fraction of their income, to be online as compared to men. So affordability, and that relates to those wage gaps as well. Device gaps in turn come there, in terms of what is the kind of device that a person can afford. If they have a lower income, they're less likely to be able to afford a fancier or more capable device than someone else. And also in terms, there's kind of considerations of what is the appropriate percentage of someone's income to be used on these issues. There's kind of social perceptions that relate to some other research that we've done of, you have higher projections of men using technology in professional settings for business practices, whereas women use it for more social outcomes, and those being seen as less valuable, less important, and therefore less deserving of kind of economic investment as a person's income into quality functional devices to stay connected to the internet. There's other spheres as well around privacy and security, particularly in certain parts of the world and across Latin America. There are huge concerns on average among women in terms of their personal privacy and security compared to men. Literacy and skills as well is a huge barrier, not just in terms of kind of the digital sense of it, but holistically, even literacy can be a challenge in many ways in terms of facing the digital gender gap. And all of this cumulatively comes together into this kind of reinforced social norm that women shouldn't be using the internet because women haven't been using the internet. Kind of what was is what will be, or what should be. And we really want to challenge this idea because we don't think this is we don't think this is the right way to think about this issue. And it's something needs to change, and we need to actually tweak the arc of the development of the relationship between technology and society rather than just accepting that this is the way it's going to be. So next slide. And so what I wanted to focus on briefly here was, sorry, my computer has just closed. So hopefully you can still all hear me. I think I'm back.
Yeah, we can. There was a couple of questions if you want to take them now. Alfredo writes, so is the gender disparity a cultural issue, or is the government or private sector affecting the resolution of the gender divide?
I guess not to be evasive about the question, I have to say yes to both. Right. In a sense that governments and private sector exist and reinforce the culture that they belong to, and I would say that there are kind of cultural norms that relate to, or social norms that relate to kind of the roles, expected roles of women and girls in relationship to technology. I'm hesitant to use culture necessarily as the word, just because I think there's a lot of loaded interpretations of culture being more innate rather than adaptable as societies may be, because I do think these norms are adaptable and we do see change over time. But there's kind of different ways of societies changing over time and adapting to change, and key parts of that are who are role leaders in society at that point in time. And so that's why, in particular, USAID, a lot of their projects right now focus on cultivating women as leaders in their own communities to change these norms rather than a top-down perspective of, just trying to, say, the internet should be more equal, let's just do it, and then hope that for the best, which I think is a good adaptation here. And then reading Bill's question as well.
Yeah, Bill elaborates on what Alfredo's question was in a different way. He says, even if there is a disparity everywhere, is it bigger in some places? Is there aggregates of areas that tend to be having more disparity than others?
Yeah, and so on that question, that first slide hopefully goes into a bit more detail about that there. But yes, we do see in general these disparities larger in countries where incomes are on average lower rather than higher. So low-income countries tend to have the largest gaps in terms of gender equality on internet usage. You also see within countries kind of the compounding intersectionality of exclusions. So in particular, a woman from a rural area who speaks a minority language and may be undereducated as well, kind of has 4 demographic factors to her profile that each of them, on average, contribute to her being less likely to use the internet. So in many ways, there's that aspect as well that plays into it. And we have to take this consideration into mind as well as we're kind of bringing as many people online with the objective of universal access. It's not just this simple binary in so many ways, but there's actually different aspects of someone's identity that will relate to how they understand the internet and how they would consider using it in their world, in their life as well.
Great.
So, yeah,
I don't see any other questions. Please proceed.
Perfect. Thanks, Glenn. What I wanted to point out was just to highlight some other research from my colleagues at the World Wide Web Foundation, which was around women's rights online and kind of this theme of closing the digital gender gap. And so one of the things that we're taking particular concern at is we're noticing that in general, technology and the internet are replicating the inequalities that exist in the world today. So we're noticing in particular, with surveys in these 3 countries of Colombia, Ghana, and Indonesia that were done in 2019, that even in countries where we saw, close to or comparative gender equality, as you see in Colombia and Indonesia in terms of internet access at that simple binary level that is kind of in most UN resources of understanding who accesses the internet on a daily basis. Comparing that then with meaningful connectivity, which we understand to have other aspects of connectivity that are really important. So kind of a high-speed connection, a smartphone, using the internet on a regular basis, gender gaps then start to emerge once again. And so it's really important to see that, even where we have this kind of top-level perspective of there's no inequality here, we're doing fine, everyone's able to access the internet. Actually, there can be deep-seated inequalities that persist today that we still need to face. That's a really crucial aspect as well. I'll pause here because I think Siva has a question that wants to come in.
Yeah, I believe he wants to get his mic open. Okay, go ahead, Siva, ask your question or comment.
Yes, and these gender equalities stem from social equalities on the ground level and based on income disparities and other sociological factors. And these findings related to the gaps in gender internet access, how is it addressed and how does it translate into action? Do you create local support groups for women to get onto internet, or is there any other special program like devices for women at a lower cost, or is there something like in what way is it addressed?
No, that's a great question. And fortunately, it's just you're kind of anticipating a couple slides ahead of me. So there's actually some extra content. I'll be happy to go into detail about that. But in short, what I'll say right now is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's kind of a range of solutions that come into this. But yeah, if you'll give me just a few more minutes, I'll get to that quickly. But not seeing any other kind of interventions at this time, I'll keep going with the next slide, if that's okay. Which actually conveniently, it actually is the next slide, is kind of what can we do? And so from our perspective as an organization, taking into consideration what we know out of this history of gender inequality and its relationship with the internet, we propose at the top level, this policy framework that we call REACT. And it's an acronym for rights, education, access, content, and targets. And so there's aspects in each of those 5 areas that can contribute to kind of positive policy developments from our perspective in terms of reducing the digital gender gap and bringing more women and girls online overall. So next slide. So in this slide, this covers the first 3 of the 5 letters, and the next slide will cover the next 2. But you'll see examples here of some of the policy strategies that can be adopted to change the way that gender norms interact with technology. So for example, to focus on rights briefly, I'll kind of pull out an example to illustrate them here. With rights, it's focusing on those gender norms and challenging the idea that women and girls shouldn't be online, and actually advocating for human rights or legal rights to internet access and participation in the online world as a crucial part of as a person's development as a crucial part of any legal framework in terms of defining someone's legal rights in a modern world as well. There's other aspects as well of data protection to ensure user privacy and consumer protection laws as well, because there's a huge aspect around trust online, and particularly e-commerce as an aspect here that'll be really important and has the gender dimension as well in terms of who's more confident using the internet, who's less confident, and therefore is, either in real terms or in perceived terms, more vulnerable to fraud through e-commerce. Education is the second aspect. So it's closing educational gaps and general educational equality for women and men, but also STEM initiatives, retaining women in kind of teachers and professors in STEM fields, particularly computer science, another key example of really advocating for and creating space for women to be leaders in their own communities, to break down these gender norms. In access, there's a wide range of different strategies that can be adopted on access, and A4AI kind of as an organization focuses on so many, so it's not really worth going into too many details there. But in particular, I think parts that are really worth pulling out are focusing on gender as part of broadband policy making and understanding, public access solutions and how they relate to gender. Are spaces where Wi-Fi is deployed considered safe for women to be or not? That can be a crucial determiner with whether or not it's going to be used or not, or who's going to use a particular public access point that might be made available to everyone. So next slide. And so here, just to kind of bring it to a close with a couple other demonstrated examples. Content, so it's about making sure that there's locally relevant content, and also, fair and free information for women and girls on topics important to them, including sexual and reproductive health, legal rights, and digital financial services, so that they feel kind of empowered by the internet and that there's information relevant to them and their development as well. And the last one is targets. And so here we really focus on the fact that you have to think about internet access being, as we're trying to applying these interventions, it's so important to keep in mind targets to understand what needs to happen next, and kind of what happens over time. So we really focus here on collecting gender disaggregated data, which is a huge challenge to understanding these problems. Is frankly, too many countries aren't collecting good quality gender disaggregated data to understand the development of these relationships between technology and society over time from a gendered lens. So that's a crucial aspect that needs to change. And it also makes it easier for kind of stakeholders to engage when they can follow these issues as well. So that's kind of a quick summary and some examples of how we can intervene on this issue from a kind of policy and regulatory perspective to close the digital gender gap through the REACT framework of rights, education, access, content, and targets. And I think the next slide will actually be my closing slide, just to say thank you to everyone. And just to summarize from our perspective, it's kind of, women, when given access to the internet, achieve extraordinary things. And so much of our research focuses on some of the examples of breaking out of this mold, breaking beyond this average of what is possible if we change this relationship between technology and society. And we really hope to kind of work together with you, with others, to kind of change the future from what it has been in terms of the digital gender gap towards a more equal world in our future. With that, thank you again, everyone, and really appreciate your time. Happy to have a really kind of open conversation from here about these issues. Thank you again.
Great, thank you. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Glenn.
Okay, yeah, I switched because of that other mic. I've gone back to my laptop. Thank you, Teddy. That was really quite informative. Before I turned to SIVA, I used to be a director with the Linux Professional Institute, and we used to do exam labs around the world. And in fact, I did it in 46 countries. And in US and Canada, we would have maybe one woman that would take the Linux administration exams. But, it's interesting. Everybody assumes that in the Middle East, the women are are not active in technology. And we did an exam lab in Damascus and Aleppo, and that was before Aleppo was annihilated. And it was amazing. The majority of the students that were taking the exam were women. So, there's pockets of in different countries where you see it always surprises you on the interest and dedication. And it requires not just legislation, but local will. So it was kind of a bit of a surprise I wasn't surprised because with my active work with IEEE, there's in my Toronto chapter, virtually every senior person is a woman that's in excellent work that they do as well. So that's my personal experience on technology. I want to turn to Siva. Siva had his hand up, and I believe it's continuing probably on the topic that he was saying earlier. Siva?
Yes, and in a sense, it's a continuation, but the other other side of my question, there is a serious injustice for women as a gender, which needs to be bridged. But when we develop programs and policies to bridge the gender gap, sometimes there is a danger of the programs actually causing a divide between the genders, between the two genders, and is there enough care taken to make sure that the programs take a balanced progression? For example, there was a program sometime back. There was some topic introduced in a forum which was titled Feminist Internet. It was just to address the issues. A group of women came up with the idea of coined a phrase called feminist internet. Without going into the details of what it was all about, the very expression feminist and internet is a dangerous idea that could have implications on one internet, united global internet. So how are you addressing the problems of bridging gender divide without causing an actual divide, without increasing divide?
Yeah, so I guess I would say here, from my perspective, I am one who believes in a wide range of solutions to this issue. There's the React framework of, one of the things it emphasizes is the fact that it's not necessarily that every country needs to do, or every community needs to adopt the exact same strategy. There's going to be different contexts in which different solutions are going to be the most appropriate or most effective in different contexts. That said, I would say I'm actually a fan of work of, I think there's a number of kind of collectives and groups that have used terminology of feminist internet to challenge gender norms around technology use. And I think they are crucial. I think they're actually really good projects, particularly in the cultivation of women's confidence in using the internet. And so I'm less concerned about projects like that, putting some folks off. I think there are things that are for certain audiences that aren't targeted towards other audiences, but that's entirely fine. Whereas I would be more concerned at what is the current trajectory, which says we are going to be okay with norms or social ideas that say that certain communities or certain parts of information should be excluded from the internet and from the online world. And so from kind of all of this in net, what I would say is it's not about every project working in every context. It's not about one size fits all. There's a myriad of solutions that I think are going to be appropriate in different contexts. But just the idea that a project is not valuable in every context does not dismiss the value of that project in general as well.
Great. Alfredo, I just want to say that Dorothy would like to say a few things. I just gave you all a bit of background. Dorothy will be our speaker in a couple of weeks. But Dorothy, can you join us with your audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
we
I
can.
can. Please go ahead.
So I'm assuming that Siva is from India. Siva, are you from India?
Yes, I'm from India. Yes.
Yes. And I remember when I was living in India about 20 years ago, I was just amazed by how much interest there was for young women to acquire tech skills. And interestingly, it was related to marriage because men wanted to marry women with tech skills because they were seen to be more sophisticated, more able to travel. So you would be able to get a better husband if you acquired tech skills. I'm giving that example to show that depending on the culture as to what the motivations can be to bridge that gap. But the thing is that, as Teddy said, we are working against historical gaps. That is, gaps where women have not been able to acquire even basic literacy skills. So we are fighting this at many different levels. But I just want to say that, for me, looking at this issue, one, I have done training programs exclusively for women, and each time I have had men try to sneak into the programs and men protest. And fortunately, the women in the programs made it very clear that they did not feel comfortable with men in the room. So I think that, yes, what happens is when the men come into the room, a number of the women who have been trained not to express themselves will now not open their mouths. And so we have to think about how we design training programs. We have to focus a lot more on helping women create content that is relevant for them. And we have to recognize there's no difference between the brain of a woman in India, a woman in Sweden, a woman in Dubai, and we see all over the Middle East, because men are more interested in business, we see a higher enrollment of women in computer science. They are not smarter than all the other women in the world, but for them, it is given as a viable option from a cultural level and something that is encouraged because they can even work from the home. So we have to focus on how we can give more women the same opportunities, encourage them, and we have to focus on the fact that at the beginning, the design of the training programs is going to be very important, both in terms of relevance, content, as well as who is in the room, simply who is in the room. And for me, the low-lying fruit that I still cannot understand why we haven't managed to fix is being able to get all the reporting that we need to respect gender disaggregated data and to collect it in an efficient way. I loved listening to what you were saying, Teddy, but as somebody who works with statistics, I know how the ITU collects the information. And for me, all of that data is very, very iffy. And we haven't managed to fix that problem. Once we have technical agencies which don't collect that data on the ground, then reporting it to the ITU, we won't be able to depend on that to get the real picture. And without the real picture, it's difficult for us to act. So I would encourage everybody listening to please make sure that in their country, and I lobby for this every day in Ghana, that they collect better data on this. Because once they have that focus on getting the information, then they will start asking themselves the question, why is there this gap? before even we figure out the economic cost of the gap. Thanks.
So Dorothy, it's Glenn. If I can respond, thank you for your insights on that. So you're saying the hard data that's being collected. You think so? If I can get you correctly, it's actually maybe a lot worse than what actually is being revealed. That's being collected by ITU.
Frankly, Glenn, we have no idea. We really don't have a good idea. I know the number of countries, and I'm sure it will be good if Teddy comes in. They are not collecting the gender disaggregated data, and yet they will report on it. We don't have, for example, the basic thing, they always tell you that in Ghana, we have more than 100% coverage, because they look at the population and they look at the number of SIM cards in circulation. We don't know how many people are holding 5 SIM cards, 10 SIM cards, and how many have none. We don't know the difference between women in urban areas and women in rural areas. We're not able to know how big that disparity is between women under 30 and women over 50. And all of those require different policy inputs. And so if we are not collecting that information, and there are very easy ways to collect information. For example, you could do surveys of university students to just figure out what's happening at the university level. But unless we are doing that kind of, those kind of surveys, we really don't have that information. And right now, ITU basically gets its information. In Ghana, it would get its information from the National Communication Authority. And it's only recently, we are now in the process of a SIM registration exercise that probably will allow us to know the gender of persons. But in Ghana, a name doesn't give you the gender of the person. Men, in most of our ethnicities, the same name can be used for men and for women. So you wouldn't be able to tell it from that unless they ask you explicitly. And Glenn, since you're Canadian, I work with a Canadian organization that was telling me that in Canada, they can't collect gender disaggregated data because it's against the law. And so to do that, they have to justify it.
Right.
You know, and I was like, what? So how are we ever going to get to the end of this, you know?
Yeah, and if I may, before Siva, because I know we're starting to get into details and important insights. Here in Puerto Rico, hi Dorothy, I'm from Puerto Rico, and there's an office here that collects some data on telecommunications. And believe it or not, at one point we had close to 3,500,000 inhabitants, but there were more than 5 million mobile devices, and this goes to your point of how skewed the data is being collected. I mean, how many actual individuals have a device? And when we go into the gender issue, there's no way we can figure out how many males and females actually own their own device. It's just aggregated information. So Teddy, there you have some more insights and some more ideas to include in future reporting. And I guess, Siva, it's your turn since you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I wanted to respond to Dorothy, and I wanted to say that I'm entirely with the ideas expressed by Dorothy that more data has to be collected, and that women have to be brought into the internet on an equal footing. But one caution is that when we collect data, we also need to pay attention to how the data is interpreted and whether the data is interpreted to meet any specific agenda towards a undesirable end, or towards programs that would in some manner work in a suboptimal manner. So those are the aspects that need to be paid attention to. And there is also something specific about women being uncomfortable in a room with men in India that she was talking about. The solution is not to have women only meetings and exclude men from the meetings, and let men have their meetings alone and women have their meetings alone. Rather, a proper solution would be to have men in the room who cheer women up, who are of the nature of cheering women up, who are supportive to women. So these are some of the observations.
I will agree with you, Siva, but let me say that we are waiting for that to happen, and the projection is it may take a few hundred years. So in the interim, what we need to do is we keep them separate, and when we have got to the stage where women are more confident about their relationship with the technology, then we mix them back up. And then
as long as this does not pit women against men.
Why not? Sometimes it will. Sometimes a woman will be very ambitious and she will want to be a boss, and a man will be in the room and he will want to be a boss, and they may fight it out. It's quite normal in a classroom for that to happen. But you know, what we are not trying to, let me put it this way. The agenda is to make sure that we get more women involved. We get more women who use the technology, more women who create with the technology, and more women who can be employed in the technology space. This is what is positive for the whole nation. And as for the individual relationships that will happen between men and women, they will sort it out, because in every culture it differs. And I will tell you that I have friends who are PhDs in computer science, and they still cook the spaghetti for their husbands as required. So, you know, everybody will work that out.
Great. Let me go back to Teddy, because I'm sure Teddy has a lot of opinions on what was just recently said. So Teddy, back to you.
Sure, thanks, Glenn. And I'll keep my intervention quite short, just because I think it's been a really fruitful conversation. And these are the exact practical discussions that happen throughout many parts of the world. But yeah, I think just to connect my presentation with Dorothy's point around the inavailability of data and how this works in consequence is a huge part of the research we did was actually those first couple of slides that were building together that trend line of gender inequality and understanding that, simply because in so many places, in so many contexts, there were so few data points. There was, maybe estimates at a, 3-year basis of what we think the gender disparity is in terms of internet use in a country. But what that means is we have these huge gaps in data that have to be inferred or estimated or proxies used, and all of these solutions have complications or limitations to them as well that we have to keep in mind. So yeah, I think it reaffirms the value of and the necessity to measure these problems if we ever really want to get them right. So yeah, I think it's a good first step for us all.
Okay, great. So let's just see if there's any other questions from anyone. I've added a couple of other resources. So there's been some great stuff by GSMA on mobile and gender issues and digital divide. It's throughout the complementary materials in the course. And I also have to mention, and I said this earlier on, IGF has a number of great sessions on inclusive internet. So there's a number of leaders that are working on this topic. So let's look at continuing along the vein of solutions. So Teddy, have you now taking this data? Are countries actually being proactive and saying, okay, we haven't done enough, and that we're going to implement legislation, or we're going to create incentives so to balance this out? Because it looks like that graph you had earlier on, it over a 10-year period, it doesn't seem to be changing. So what proactive things can be done in order to actually bridge that divide?
Yeah, so in short, the answer to your question is no. Governments have not done enough in this area and on these issues. And so one of the other pieces of research that we do at A4AI is every 2 years we do a summary policy review of around 70 countries and their policy contexts for how they cover broadband policy, and it covers very technical things such as how they manage electromagnetic spectrum, to how licensing frameworks are set in country, how universal service fund is set up in that country. And one of the indicators we collect there is how gender responsive is broadband policy in general in that country. And that indicator around how gender responsive it is historically one of the worst performing indicators across the globe in terms of where governments are right now. And so in that sense, I think that is why we've, wanted to do research like this and, focus on an issue like this, is we truly think governments have not stepped up to the plate in the way that they need to address this issue. And real, genuine action needs to be taken to challenge these norms, to cultivate leadership in communities that challenges the digital gender gap as it exists today.
So following up on that, and then I'll turn over to Siva. There's an organization called Transparency International that looks at corruption in different countries and evaluate countries, and they have a scale. They give them a ranking. So is there any kind of third party, perhaps yourself, that evaluate so that we have a snapshot of what it was like, say, 5 years ago and what it is now, that they actually are moving in the right direction?
And if I may, Teddy, before you answer, adding to what Glenn just mentioned, are there any international organizations or global organizations that actually, besides you guys, collect data and are doing actual initiatives, projects where they're dealing with the bridging the gender divide? Thank you. Go ahead, Teddy.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first question of, kind of something similar to a ranking, just because that's probably going to be the quickest thing for me to answer. Is one of this link I've just put in here is to our data explorer with the Affordability Report, which was that resource I was just mentioning. And so that indicator, which I know because I work with the data set all the time, as the A14 indicator, you can compare how countries perform there and see how that data has worked over time. So you can toggle through the years on that website to see where countries have changed, done well, done not so well. So that's one area. In terms of organizations working in this area, my hesitancy to answer this is simply because I feel that there are so many organizations that work on this area that to single out just a few denies the spotlight to so many. Just because I think there are so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Teddy, and that actually is my point, that I think there's so many groups out there doing something that we sort of need a repository where we can aggregate all that information and see actually where we are in terms of NGOs, what they're doing to bridge this gap in terms of gender. Thank you for that. I see that Siva has his hand up, so go ahead before we reach the top of the hour, and then Teddy can respond to that as well. Thank you.
On my question of not causing divide between men and women, Dorothy said, "Why not?" And I'm not a match for someone with lobbying skills as Dorothy. Perhaps a better response would come from the internet community. But I just want to say that there is a constructive way of solving problems, and there is also a destructive way of solving problems. And I think the internet community would believe in solving the problems in a constructive way without politicizing gender. Thank you.
Terry, final comments?
Yeah, I think there's, I think this has been a really interesting conversation in terms of there's a lot for us to consider in terms of methods and ways forward, but I think hopefully what we can see is that there's universal recognition that the trajectory that we have right now is not necessarily the one we want to all have in terms of the relationship we have between technology and society. And so hopefully what this conversation has done is all sparked within us, the aspiration and some food for thought in terms of how we do that and what are some starting steps around the data that we collect, the policies that we adopt into changing that relationship so we have kind of a more equal and better world for the future.
Great, thank you. Well, that's been wow. The time has gone really quickly. We're going to wrap up. So again, thank you so much, Teddy, for joining us. And this video will be available after later today. I'll turn over to my associate Alfredo to any final words.
Yeah, sure. I do want to thank you, Teddy, for the insights on what your organization is doing. I do invite everybody that watches this recording afterwards to look into the content we have available on this development pillar of internet governance, and any resource you feel that will help us better understand where we should be heading towards, although we sort of hinted that the digital divide is something that we have to take care of if we want to reach more internet users in a friendly manner, if I may say it that way, and reach out to other sectors of the community besides the government so that we can work on this issue. We're looking forward, and Dorothy, thank you for joining this conversation. We're looking forward to your presentation because I believe that you have a lot of ideas that are worth digging into in more details. So thank you for joining us. Teddy, again, thank you for being so kind and sharing with us this information. We are reaching the middle of this cohort of students, so please join the conversations and feel free to contact us if you need anything from us. Glenn, final words from you so we can end this session. Thank you.
Yeah, just the survey, please, if you can complete it. And if you, any of you have any research reports or other suggestions to share with, we have a discussion thread. You can add your comments, and we're not going to resolve all these issues in 1 hour, but I think it was a great opportunity to bring this issue up, highlight it, and think along the lines of how the research is done. And I think all the discussion was a great and civil discussion today. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And that concludes our session. Thanks again.
Bye. Have a great day.